Hello and welcome, I'm Oleksiy and you're watching Head to Head with UATV. Experts have found new evidence depicting that there is advanced, recently developed Russian military hardware in occupied Donbas. This is according to the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab. In 2016, the system found in Ukraine was spotted in force of the Russian military in Syria. To talk more about this and other violations of the Minsk agreements, we welcome to the studio today Oleksiy Melnyk, co-director of Foreign Relations and International Security Programs at the Razumkov Centre think tank. Hello and thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon.
So, this lab found photographs of some kind of a Riga satellite communication system. Is there any data? Where has it been manufactured? And how did it end up in the occupied territories?
Well, this is not the first evidence of the presence of Russian hard presence on the Ukrainian territory. And in numerous discussions, especially a couple of years ago, when the Russian mantra that Russia is not there was quite powerful and well accepted in the West, I would recommend our colleagues just to come to Kyiv and see not pictures, but like many tons equipment just located in the Museum of War here in the center of Kyiv. So this is just another evidence of Russian presence in the Ukrainian territory and Russian real role in fueling this conflict.
Mm-hmm. But how do you think? What is the tendency now? Do Russians increase the export of this illegal ammunition to the occupied territories? Do they prepare somehow to escalate possibly the conflict, or what does this mean now?
Well, I would probably disagree with the term that you use, an export. It's not actually an export.
Illegal smuggle, well, I don't know how to... we could describe it with different words.
Let's make it clear, because these are the Russian forces, and no matter whether they called militia or army corps, but this is the Russian forces, commanded, coordinated, equipped by the Russian Federation.
Using their equipment in Ukraine.
This is the Russian operation, no matter what insignia they wear and no matter what the names they bear.
Well, I just want to mention that the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission has recorded and actually filed in a recent report that observers counted 39 howitzers, 28 tanks and 4 missile systems in the Luhansk region, and in the Donetsk region they found 109 tanks, 14 armored combat vehicles also were recorded. Is it a lot of ammunition, keeping in mind that 2 of the provinces of Ukraine partially are occupied?
Well, actually, the numbers that you just mentioned are not about the total amount of weapons present on this
is
territory.
Only according to the OSCE,
it's according to the OSCE, but they usually do not report the total number. They report the number of weapons which are located outside the territories they are supposed to be withdrawn.
Okay.
So, because the real number, and there are some data provided by Ukrainian intelligence, military intelligence service, also by other independent sources, and the real number of tanks, for example, is something around 300 to 400 pieces. And I would remind you that this is more than, for instance, one of the biggest army in Germany has. So the amount of heavy weapons on this territory is enormous. And this is, again, another evidence that it is not the weapons that been left behind retreating Ukrainian forces. This is not the weapons that been captured by separatists back in 2014 in military depots. All these weapons, or almost all of them, were delivered from Russia.
From Russia. Well, and the number of shellings is constantly increasing. So we sometimes have some 37 shellings in 24 hours, according to the Ukrainian military spokesperson. What does it mean now? As I asked you, is the situation deteriorating, or is it somehow frozen still?
Well, it's too early to call it a frozen conflict, because, as you rightly mentioned, there numbers of ceasefire violations on a daily basis, people being killed on both sides, including civilians. But I would probably not call it as an escalation, because in average it's probably kind of stability that we can observe at least over the course of last few months. Another interesting issue whenever I hear or read about number of shellings is where all these shells come from. Because recently there was quite an interesting statement made by Alexander Hook, who was chief of an SMM mission, and he said that actually ceasefire could be provided very quickly, because he mentioned a number of cases when there was presumably an order from the Russian side to stop fire.
Really?
The fire was stopped, like in a matter of hours. Another very powerful instrument to stop this war or stop the violence there, just stop providing weapons, because actually there are no production lines on the occupied territories to supply these weapons and equipment in such a big numbers.
So you mean that people have all these weapons in their hands and they wouldn't stop firing, or what?
Well, we shouldn't rule out some accidents or incidents, which is kind of nature of this kind of conflict.
I just haven't heard that Russia was ready actually to cease the fire, the shellings.
Well, again, this is one of the instruments to control. First, because Russia has control over the forces on the occupied territories down to like platoon level. They have either Russian officers as commanders or Russian officers as so-called advisors in the units.
Yes.
But also, one of the most effective and efficient instrument is how much of this stuff Russia supplies, or how much been stored there, and who takes control over the storages of the shells. This is the way that Russia can stop shelling. But again, it wouldn't exclude any incidents, because this area been heavily mined.
Yes.
And also there are some gangs and also just people sitting in the trenches who have light weapons.
Well, another issue to discuss is elections to be held in November in the occupied territories of Donbas, and this issue has been recently brought up at the negotiations in Minsk. As far as I understand, this was Kiev's stance to emphasize that the elections, if they're going to be held, they will be illegal and not recognized. What is the feedback from the other representative, from the other speakers of the negotiations, and what is the stance of our international partners on these elections?
Elections is one of these contradictory issues to which each side has kind of opposite opinion. Because according to the Ukrainian position and the position of the West, again, it's written in the Minsk document that the elections should be conducted according to the Ukrainian legislation and under international supervision, which is not the case,
of course,
here in next elections.
Well, another issue that was discussed at the trilateral contact group in Minsk was this prisoners release or prisoners swap. Is there any data on that? What do we know about possible prisoners exchange?
We don't know much because what we know about the results of the negotiation is actually from the statements made by the Ukrainian representatives. And as far as I know, I haven't heard any encouraging news about this.
But do you have any idea how to bargain with Russia? What or whom to propose in exchange of our Ukrainian people that are being held behind bars illegally?
You know, it's quite a cynic to use term bargain when it comes to the exchange of prisoners.
But this is the nowadays reality.
This is the reality.
This is not what I want.
Yeah, I agree, but this is the reality. And actually, again, this is kind of this so-called hybrid warfare, because Russians use not just prisoners of war, but hostages, political prisoners, to bargain for to gaining any geopolitical or economic advantages from Ukraine. And this is, again, this is the reality, and I'm afraid that we can't do much about this.
Well, there was this rumor about a possible scenario of possible exchange. Oleksiy and 3 Russian citizens convicted in the United States. Has there any authority proved the credibility of this information, and maybe is there anything being done towards this in the direction of this negotiations?
As far as I know, I mean, official statements made by the U.S. officials and by the Russian officials. I would rather trust the U.S. officials when they said that there was no such an offer.
There was no such an offer, okay.
And I don't think that it can be possible at any circumstances. But I just want to remind that Russia is always asking the West to force Ukraine to fulfill its commitments under the Minsk agreement. But one of the first points of the Minsk agreement is the exchange of prisoners. And this is actually every time when it comes to negotiations or trying to make any bargain or trade-off with Russia, I mean, they should be constantly reminded that this is one of the key points of the Minsk agreement. As far as the first one, ceasefire, and the next one about exchange, all for all, not like once and so for 3 Russian prisoners, all for all. And Russian prisoners, criminals in jails in the United States had nothing to do with the Ukrainian-Russian relations.
Well, thank you so much for your comments, and unfortunately we run out of time, but this was interesting, your opinion, interesting what you said.
And thank you for your interesting questions.
That was Oleksiy Melnyk, co-director of Foreign Relations and International Security Programs at the Razumkov Centre think tank. Thank you for watching Head to Head, and stay tuned for more with UATV.